Good evening and afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Marr. I'm the Director of Individual Giving at Nature and Culture International, and I'm excited to welcome all of you to our webinar on the Andean Corridor project. We're going to talk about how our team of partner biologists is working to conserve habitat for wide-ranging species in the Andes. It's going to be a panel discussion tonight, and after the panel, I'll open the floor for Q&A. Please submit your questions in the chat box tonight, and we'll make sure that we answer all of them. Closed captions are enabled. Please click the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen to turn on captions. And if you enjoy the panel discussion tonight, I hope you'll consider supporting our work and the work of our partner organizations. We'll provide more resources on how you can follow us and how you can donate at the end of the panel discussion tonight. So joining me today are our own Fabián Rodas, the coordinator of the Andean Corridor project, Rodrigo Cisneros, a researcher from the Technical University of Loja who studies the spectacled bear, Cindy Hurtado from BIOS, who studies the Pampas cat, and Sebastián Kohn from the Andean Condor Foundation. They're all going to speak briefly about their own research and how it relates to the Andean Corridor project. A little structure of the webinar tonight. So I'll give a brief introduction to nature and culture. Fabián is going to talk about what connectivity is and what the Andean Corridor project is. We'll have the panel discussion and then we'll move into questions and answers. It's a brief overview of our panelists. So for those of you who aren't familiar with nature and culture and what we do, we support the creation of protected areas, primarily on the subnational level, by working with local governments and indigenous communities. We ensure the long-term management and sustainable financing of these areas and have never had a protected area reversed during our 26 years that we've been around. We create connectivity corridors between national protected areas, as we'll be discussing today. We support the preservation of indigenous culture and center indigenous people as the stewards of their ancestral lands. And we forge relationships with local conservation experts, some of whom you will be meeting today. Over our 26 years, we have protected over 22 million acres of land, 3.4 billion tons of carbon, and we've supported over 300 indigenous and local communities across 7 ecoregions in 6 Latin American countries. I'm going to pass things off to my colleague, Fabián Rodas, who will explain the Andean Corridor project in more detail. Presenters, please let me know when you want me to move to the next slide.
Well, good evening. Thank you for coming and thank you for joining us in this, this dream of protecting this landscape, very large landscape, marvelous space. And thank you for letting me talk about this area on behalf of many people that are working in this place to protect species, ecosystems, water, and many more. The next, please. Yeah, this guy here is E.O. Wilson. This is one of the most famous biologists, probably after Darwin. His concern at the end of his life was to create a project, a very comprehensive project that protects life on Earth to make sure that humans can survive, not only for animals or ecosystems, but for us. And he calculates that at least 50% of Earth must be protected to maintain 85% of biodiversity. You see in this map a lot of green dots. So there are a lot of studies about the most important areas to protect. And but which half should we protect? Next, please. So here we are focusing on our area of work, the tropical Andes. This is the most biodiverse hotspot on the Earth. From the 36 hotspots we have on Earth, this is the most biodiverse because of the number of endemic species, the total number of species, and many more. and also the threats this area is supporting. Yeah, this area contains about 1/6 of all the plants on the planet. And as I mentioned, many of them are endemic. It means that only exist in this area, in any other place in the world. So you can see how green is this area. So the light green are the most important areas to protect. So next, please. How can we protect this area? This is a large space, 2 countries. Well, the tropical Andes goes from Venezuela to Bolivia, but we are focusing on this very special area because in this place, the Andes are very low, are not as high as in northern Ecuador or in southern Peru. This area, in this area, the Andes are lower, so we don't have glaciers or high volcanoes with snow. This area, the volcanism, so the volcanoes here in this space are older than in other places in the Andes. So the Andes are lower. It allows the crossing species from the Amazon to the coast and allows more efficient use of these spaces to connect with other ecosystems or between ecosystems. But the connectivity matters because so we should protect the flux of genes from species, because if they are isolated, the species could even be extinct, even if they are inside protected areas, because protected areas could be like islands if they don't have habitat protected or conserved around. So could happen this effect of isolation that will finally extinct the species, even if this protection is very high inside the protected area. So the protected areas are of paramount importance, but are not considered sufficient to conserve biodiversity or ecosystem services. So this insularity effect reduces the genetic variability of species, diminish the population, or even can cause extinctions. So the corridors about the isolation, the connectivity that we should maintain between these protected areas allows this movement of the species, avoid the isolation or reconnect spaces between protected areas, for instance, permitting that species can move from one place to another to maintain their long-term variability and wider access to resources and recolonized patches. So in the map, you can see the protected area system of Ecuador. And you see some of them are large, some of them are small, but many of them are isolated. So this is a problem if we don't find a way to maintain habitats between these protected areas. Especially in southern Ecuador, you can see how small are the protected areas and how far away are one from each other. The next one, please. So connectivity, ecological connectivity, is the unimpeded movement of species and flow of natural processes that sustain life on Earth. That's the concept. And in the map, you can see one of the most, well, in the photo, you can see one of the most important species of United States. This is a migratory species that needs habitats, not only in United States or North America, but also in South America. But how they can move to Bolivia, from Canada to Bolivia. So please go ahead with the, yeah, thank you. So in the map, you can see how the species moves around the year, and the winter season and the yeah, and you can see they are using in southern Ecuador and northern Peru exactly the area that we are trying to protect, and we are trying to maintain or recover this connection. This is the only space they can use to go to south, and in south they need to they have a lot of resources that allows them to go back to North America. So it's very important for this species and for many other migratory birds to maintain connectivity of these habitats. Yeah, the next, please. So far in this area, in this map, you can see the Andean Corridor, what we call the Andean Corridor in southern Ecuador and northern Peru. The red line is the boundary of the corridor. These have a limit, not only in the map. I mean, it's a natural limit, it's a political limit, it's a water source limit. So it's a lot of science behind this map. But the challenge, the highlights are, this is two countries, Ecuador and Peru. It's 5 million acres. The total of surface is 2.2 times the Yellowstone National Park, for instance. So far, we have established 80 protected areas on this space. Mostly cloud forest, paramo, grassland, lakes, and wetlands are the ecosystems that we are protecting. And we have some challenge because many more areas should be declared and managed. We have to establish binational collaboration. We have to work with many local governments, universities, communities, and that's what we are doing since 12 years ago, that we start working on the northern part of this area that is the Sangay-Podocarpus corridor. So we have a lot of achievements, but we need to make sure that all this area is maintaining connectivity. So we have threats like mining, like cattle ranching, global warming, the construction of roads and other infrastructure. The 5 million people depends on the ecosystem services that are produced in this area. So it's very important for our economy, for our culture, for our society to protect this area, beyond also the importance of protecting biodiversity. So it's a matter of time, and it needs an effort of a lot of institutions and people. The next, please. Yeah, so creating this connectivity corridor will also benefit the other species, not only the biggest, like the species we are seeing and continuation in this talk, but also small ones, like some local birds, some endemic species like these frogs and this salamander that are new species we found recently in this area, and others like jaguar and many more. The next, please. Our plan for the next steps, we have a 5-year plan from here that includes 5 components that we implemented in collaboration with many local governments, universities, rural communities, and other stakeholders. Our strategy is always supporting and strengthening local capacities to make sure that everyone is trying to protect their local space. So we are acting locally, but thinking globally. So we need to do official recognition from both governments, Ecuador and Peru. We are trying to create new protected areas or upgrading conservation status for at least 700,000 acres. We need to strengthen conservation and management of existing reserves for more than 1.2 million acres. We will make more research, monitoring of these conservation values, large mammals, predators, endemic species, threatened species. For sure, we will discover new species. And we need to implement climate change mitigation and adaptation measurements. So all this is a proposal that is built with local people, local institutions, and of course depends on our commitment and as much support we can get, this will be better. Okay, so I'm glad I had the chance to share with you this brief introduction to the area. I hope you enjoyed it. I can answer some questions. And next, I would like to introduce you to Rodrigo Cisneros. He's a professor of one of our universities in this space, Technical University of Loja. Rodrigo is a specialist in monitoring and researching Andean bears. He works in association with NCI since 22 years ago. And of course, he's a very good friend of us and a leader of conservation of this area. So thank you, and Rodrigo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Fabián. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here and share with you some of our ideas and contributions to this big proposal. I will talk about Andean bear. So next, please. I started to work with Andean bear 20 years ago, just thinking about corridors. And at that point was many people around the south of Ecuador was thinking we need to connect the protected areas. We need to join them because we need bigger spaces for conservation. Andean bear is a really interesting species. Its ancestor entered to South America during the Pleistocene. Thanks to the key adaptation that this species has, like the flat molars, that's really important because it's like a panda in terms of despite it's a carnivore, evolutionary speaking, it can access to a huge amount of fibrous plants in these lands in the Andes. So the large size forced to the bears to spend an important part of the time during the day to look for food. So to access to this food makes to the bears to transform the habitat, breaking the branches, scratching the ground and looking for ground bromeliads or any other fiber plants, and in between a lot of fruits. Next, please. So that's why Andean bear transform the forest, but also disperse seeds of many plants. Just a few view. Next, please. There is a panel. This panel is only for a small portion of northern paramos of Podocarpus National Park. And you can see, it doesn't matter the species, each color represents one species across the time. So you can see how the diversity of a diet can change. And always the orange color represent the fiber plants. So you can see how it keep working, keep eating with fiber plants and add some other species in the diet. So it makes him a key species and engineering species in the habitat that it inhabits. Next, please. For this reason and for this adaptability, the Andean bear has been considered as a landscape species. The latitudinal distribution and the altitudinal distribution make it possible to analyze the landscape and think about population of Andean bears. And you can use this species to design like an umbrella species. If you protect population of Andean bear, you can protect other species in the Andes. Next, please. So time ago, 20 years ago, we used habitat modeling of Andean bear. That's a southern portion of the Ecuador. And thanks to this research and many other information that we add, it was possible to create a new national park, the Yacuri National Park, which is just in the border with Peru. And at that point, we realized that it has to be continued, and it makes sense, as Fabián explained to us, geographically, the continuity of the Cordillera keep to the northern Peru. So we were thinking, okay, let's see what's going on if we cross the border, and we think in the natural borders for animals. Next, please. So 10 years ago, many stakeholders start to think about a corridor between the middle of the Cordillera, the Sangay National Park, and Podocarpus National Park, because there are also a lot of indicators that show us the continuity of habitat between these two national parks, and there was not too much protected areas at that point. So we start to think about develop this other corridor. Next, please. If you can see, this map is showing the habitat distribution for Andean bear now. This is available in the action plan for Andean bear of Ecuador. And it's clear that the eastern Cordillera is almost continuous across the country. And in fact, the genetic information using for Andean bear population in Ecuador say to us that all of the group is, all of the population from Ecuador is like one unit in terms of evolution. So it's important in terms of conservation. But next, please. We need to know what happened if we cross the border. So that's the next challenge in terms of analyzing and in terms of conservation. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. We are facing a lot of that one. Yeah, we are facing a lot of troubles, a lot of challenges, because deforestation keep pushing to the populations to the natural areas. It's not so clear, but you can see the blue lines. All of those blue lines are the protected areas, the national ones or for the local governments. And it's clear that deforestation, which is the white color around, is around all of the protected areas. So fragmentation on habitat is pushing also. And in our surveys, there are some places in this region that we have not found Andean bear activity, Andean bear signs. So we don't know for sure if there is not Andean bear there, but it's a concern for us if we are losing locally population, or we are losing ecological functions of this species, because it's a very important species for the Andean dynamic of ecosystem. Next, please. In addition, that picture shows you the global frame of what's happened with hunting, but also with human wildlife conflict. In the upper area, you can see a kind of forest and the border. So in the border, there are many activities that are not friendly with wildlife in general world, and a lot of not well driving processes of cattle, especially deforestation, that push to the farmers to put the animals really close to the forest, which means to put food in front of the animals, of the carnivores like Andean bear. So we know that we have troubles. We have Andean bear attacking cattle and farm animals, but we, according with our models, management of this activity has to be attended by, it's a complex situation, but we need to attend in many ways to reduce the increase of the border of this activity, but reduce the necessity of land to increase the effectiveness of the cattle ranching. So we need to work hard in that part. But for all of these necessities, we need next, please. We need data. We come from the university, and we know that for all the things that we want to do in terms of to know how the wildlife is is which traits are pushing them, and how are working or conservation activities. We need information. We need to be focused on develop indicators as best as we can do it. And Andean bear monitoring and other mammals monitoring, like Andean tapir, Andean wolf, is necessary. So what we are doing now is try to prepare our people, local government, local rangers, to try to organize this data collection, to use them. They can use that information, but as Fabián said, thinking locally for each reserve, but we also need to think in landscape scale and to take decisions at that range. So our main goal now is to keep preparing our people, to keep increasing the kind of measurements that we take at the field, and yeah, to have the best feedback that we can get from the field to work better in conservation for the next years and for the next generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. Up next, we have Cindy Hurtado, who is a Pampas cat specialist working with BIOS, and she's going to introduce herself and launch into her presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Laura. I am a member of BIOS, but I'm also co-coordinating the Pampas Cat Working Group. And this working group, it's a network of conservationists that focus on the protection of the Pampas cat across its distribution. And we have members in several countries where the Pampas cat is located. So we have members in Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. Next, please. I will tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing in BIOS towards the protection of Pampas cats. And for the first few years of our work, we focused on research. And the research was mainly on the Sechura Desert and dry forest ecosystems. And next, please. Our research efforts focused on movement ecology of Pampas cats. So we got GPS collars and put them in these cats so we could see how they were using the landscape. We also used camera trapping and to understand the distribution of these species. And then we also used a scat collection just to understand the diet of these species. Next, please. In the dry forest, however, we looked at the distribution of these species, and we kind of took more of a landscape approach. Next. So we tried to look for these species across a large area. So I know this map is a little busy, but here, what I'm trying to show is that we looked for these species in several areas. So you see here southern Ecuador and northern Peru. And long story short, we found a cat from number 9, so it's right at the middle of the map, down south. So we don't find these species in the humid, more type of forest in western Ecuador. However, we also found other carnivores, and we were asking the question here about how connectivity is affecting these other carnivores, right? If it's something that we need to be looking at. So we had other predictors, and this is the only graph that I'm going to show. So this is showing that we looked at habitat and we looked at protected area and looked at connectivity, and we found that carnivore richness, so the number of carnivores that we have in a landscape, it's in fact affected by whether the landscape is connected or not. So this is something we've done in the dry forest, and I think it would be and really super interesting if we do something similar in the tropical Andes, especially because we can also look at species-specific responses and see which species are more vulnerable to lack of connectivity. Next, please. So then going into the tropical Andes, and this is recent work, we decided to leave behind a little bit about our research activities and focus more on the reduction of threats. So what is this species suffering from in these areas, and how can we act to reduce those threats? So the big threat for the small cat is the conflict that it has with humans because it predates on domestic animals. So on the next photo that Laura is going to show, it's going to be a little hard to look at, but that's represents the conflict. Next, please. So when we go to a field, sometimes this is like what we see, and it's, you know, like these hard feelings towards the cat because it's affecting the livelihood of rural communities. So what we're doing now next is trying to change the way they keep their animals, which is usually just having chickens roaming free, or, you know, like not well built enclosures for their domestic animals. So we're just by adding this quick change of, you know, like making a better enclosure with a roof and some, you know, like walls, protective walls that prevent Pampas cats from coming in, we're just reducing kills, retaliatory killings. So I know this might be like something that like a quick fix that it's easy to do for themselves to implement, but we need to remember that most of these communities live in extreme poverty. So something like that, it's not achievable or not affordable for them. Next, please. So some of our activities now focus on environmental education. So we go to schools and we talk to adults as well about, and we spread the word about, you know, like Pampas cat, what are their threats, how can you, you know, like reduce the threats and help us preserve these species. Next, please. Then another threat that we found is that these cats are also victims of vehicle collisions. So next, we started citizen science program in which we ask the community to send us records of different roadkill wildlife that they find. So we found that they have some cats that have been killed in not only Pampas cat, but also other species. And the Sichuan fox is one of those as well. Next, please. So another threat that we're trying to reduce within our activities is the spread of disease caused by domestic dogs. So in Peru, we have this really big problem about free-ranging dogs, just because we don't have, and we can discuss this also, but you know, like dogs become a problem when they're abandoned by their owners, and then they go to rural areas or wildlife places, wild places, where then they can feed from wild animals and also spread diseases. So now in areas where we know it's close to Pampas cats, we are doing these vaccinations and hopefully sterilizations campaigns in the future to reduce the problem of the spread of disease. Next, please. Yeah, and that will be everything that I have for you about the Pampas cat. So I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Next up, we have Sebastián Kohn from the Andean Condor Foundation. Sebastián's going to share a little bit about his research about the condors and how it connects to the Andean Corridor.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, but I'll be talking more about the black-and-chestnut eagle, actually, even though we do work with condors as well, and they're involved in the Andean condor as well. But yeah, I am a researcher and executive director of Fundación Condor Andino in Ecuador, and we work to conserve threatened species through scientific research and then direct action in local communities, but always based in the scientific research. We have been working in the Andean condor, with the Andean condor in our research program since 2012, and with the black-and-chestnut eagle since 2017, as part of an international project with researchers working in Colombia, Peru, and Argentina as well. In 2018, we started cooperating with Nature and Culture International through our mutual involvement in the Andean Corridor work group, and with the discovery of a black-and-chestnut eagle nest site in one of the national parks located in the corridor we're talking about today. And in last year, in 2021, we signed an agreement to work a lot more closely with Nature and Culture in the Andean Corridor. And since then, we have a team working in the area full-time, working in our several projects, but more especially with a focus on the Black-and-Chestnut Eagle project. Next. So the Black-and-Chestnut Eagle, or Spisaetus isidori, is this wonderful big eagle that is critically endangered in Ecuador and is considered endangered internationally by the IUCN. It's the top predator in the Andean forests, and as such plays a very critical role in the maintenance of the ecosystem services, and the whole food web. So our project focuses on several areas to understand the species and know what to do to conserve it. First, one of our components is population biology, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Then our second component is perception. Then with the diet program, can you please play the video, please? One of the main focuses we do is on understanding the diet of the species. This way we know the integrity of the ecosystem around the nest sites we discover. And we can see if this particular pair of eagles, or in this area, the conflict with humans is very accentuated or not. And also try to understand how this conflict relates to deforestation in the area or forest cover around the nest sites. All of the work we do through local young people, usually from local communities that live next to eagles, or if we possibly can, with the owners of the actual plot where the eagle nests are located. And we train these local parabiologists in monitoring techniques, as well as in environmental education techniques, and in responding to the conflict that the eagles face. Finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about the conservation actions that we carry out after all this information is put together. Next, please. So with the population biology component, we want to know where the eagles are, where they aren't, and how all those areas are connected. You can see all the way on the right, a map of South America. That's the range of the Black-and-Chestnut eagle. These eagles are completely dependent on the Andean foothills and on the cloud forest located on both sides of the Andes in the north, and once you get into Peru, mostly on the eastern side of the Andes. With a species with such a restricted range, mostly the altitude, the elevation is what restricts their movements. It's very important. They're very dependent on the movement along the Andean mountains, and this Andean corridor is extremely important for the connectivity of their populations. The big map that we can see with all the bubbles with stars are the nest sites that we have located in the country. The ones in red are the ones known before we started our project, including one in the south in the Rio Negro Sopladora National Park, part of the Sangay Podocarpus corridor. The ones in green are the ones that our team has found in the last few years, since 2017 when we started with this project. And at the bottom, the ones in yellow are the ones that we found in cooperation with Nature and Culture International within the last year of intense work in the area. Once we find these nest sites, we want to know, like I mentioned before, the diet of the species. So we set up a monitoring program in each of the nest sites according to when the eagles are using it. They are very territorial, so they spend around their nest the whole year. So it helps us a lot understanding their ecology and understanding what they're doing year round. Another of our components is the tracking of the eagles. with satellite trackers, both with GSM and with just satellite connection. In Ecuador, so far, we've tagged 2 eagles. Our colleagues have tagged also in Colombia and in Argentina. And this is one of the examples in the picture that we have here. We are always working with the local community. Of the 7 people that show in that picture, 4 are from the local community and are our local parabiologists. So they get this experience hands-on working with the eagles, both monitoring the nests for the diet and also handling them when we are capturing and tagging them with satellite trackers. These trackers will help us know how they're dispersing, where they're moving, also the size of the territory that each of the couples have, each of the breeding pairs have, and how they connect to each other and through the different landscape. Next. Perception is one of the also important aspects of our program. We want to know how people see the eagle, the people that are sharing their daily lives. This is an eagle that has been able to adapt to a lot of deforestation. And as you can see in the top picture in the top right, they're flying over people's houses. They are sharing their day-to-day with people throughout their range. So we have, whenever we find a nest site, we go and do polls around the area. We cover an area of 2 kilometers around the nest and try to go to every single house and talk to the people to see how they see the eagle, if they see the species in a positive or a negative way, why they see it in such a way, and what is their tolerance. Then we compare that with how they perceive the eagle to their actual losses and see how many chickens actually get taken by the species. And we compare that with the way that people relate to the environmental authorities in each of the countries. This paper that was published last year, we conducted the research both in Colombia and Ecuador and compared the different government attitudes towards people and towards conservation. And we were able to find that the top-down management imposed by nation authorities, maybe authorities in Quito here in Ecuador, whenever that management technique is applied, people are less likely to accept the eagle, accept their losses, and to have a positive relationship with wildlife in general. So it's very important to be able to also get with this data to local authorities and try to generate these management plans and these conservation strategies from the ground up, and having all stakeholders be able to express their opinion, which is one of the reasons we love working in the Andean Corridor in the south, and especially in the Sangay-Podocarpus corridor, with the work led by Nature and Culture, where we have so many stakeholders actively working together and supporting each other in conserving the area. Next. So with all this, you can play the video while I am talking, please. With all this information, which is born with the scientific research in mind, we need to carry out these conservation actions. It is an endangered species that is going to disappear extremely fast. Unfortunately, we see them dying every month. We are picking up a dead body somewhere along the range. So it's a shame everything that happens with the species. So we carry out environmental education. First, we go to the areas where we know there are eagles. We know there's a high density of nest sites, and we know where there's conflict when we're monitoring the diet of a particular pair. If they're eating a lot of chickens, we know there's a lot of conflict, and that breeding pair is likely to be shot. So we go into the area and give out and give an environmental education campaign, both in schools and in the field itself. And our main ambassador there are our local parabiologists. Like you can see in the picture on the left, just the absolute joy in that kid's face when he was able to hold the eagle that he had been monitoring. He actually lives right under the nest, and his family has lost many chickens to the eagle. But once they get to sit in front of the nest site and monitor and see the chick growing and flapping its wings, they're completely enamored with the species, and they become incredible ambassadors in their own communities. So we're learning from communities and also supporting them to improve their agricultural and livestock practices. Our polling in the areas around the nest sites have allowed us to see the different strategies that different local actors have come up with to decrease the conflict or to even eliminate it. Small changes to the enclosures where the chickens are, areas where the chickens can hide. So we're going into the field, into the houses where people are suffering losses to the eagles, and we can control them with this small actions or implementing basically a more biodiverse agricultural area. So when people have a more diverse farm, they're less likely to come into conflict with eagle and other species. We are generating a coexistence manual, not just to reduce conflict, but for people to coexist and live peacefully with these eagles. Hopefully we'll have this manual ready by the end of the year, and we'll be able to take them to the field and take it to the communities to be able to give it out and work with people to resolve this problem. And our main action, like I've repeated a couple of times, is our local capacity building. Our ambassadors, our parabiologists in these communities, once they get bitten by this bug of conservation, there's no stopping them. We have had many kids that start working with us, they get enamored with the species, and then they decide to become biologists. Before working with us, they didn't have any plans for their lives. They didn't have any hopes, dreams, besides, just getting by. And now they're going into college, and we've had at least 3 guys that go into college. They start educating, they become the first person in their family to actually go to university and to study, and they become biologists and then come back with all that knowledge to help their community. So we're very excited and proud about this work. And with that, I want to say thank you very much to Nature and Culture International, to all our partners, everyone that talked before me, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Sebastián. Thank you to all of our fantastic panelists for all of this incredible information and sharing your research with us. So now we're going to move into the question and answer section. So if all the panelists want to come on video, we already have a lot of questions. So I hope people this might go a little bit over 5 p.m. Pacific. So I hope people are willing to stay on a little bit longer as we answer some questions. And panelists, please try to keep your answers concise. So our first question is for all of the panelists. What types of issues do long-ranging animals face at country borders? Fabián, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, but probably it will be better if Rodrigo answered this question because he's working on the species specifically.
Okay. Rodrigo.
Rodrigo. Oh yeah.
Rodrigo. It's here. Rodrigo, do you want to share what some issues are that spectacled bear face at country borders?
I think that is not about the country borders, it's about the borders of the habitat, the main situation. The conflict that is the main problem, human-wildlife conflict, but that's also deforestation. I think that's the loss of habitat and fragmentation. Andean bear is a big species, it's a big mammal, so you need a lot of space. That's the main concern. What we know is that all the population is connected in terms of historically, but the question now is how is going on the connectivity among populations now. So the question is, for example, Tabaconas Nambaye reserve in northern Peru, they have for sure an Andean bear population and Andean tapir population. And the question is, are they coming and going to Ecuadorian reserves or not? Are they sharing the genes between them? That's our concern, and we have not answered yet about that. So that's the next stage, right?
Thanks, Rodrigo. Do any of the other panelists have something to add about country borders and how they affect the movement of your species?
On our side, we work mostly with raptors. Both Andean condors, black-and-chestnut eagles are not affected at all by the country borders, more by the topography. We do have some connectivity for condors, but not too much between Ecuador and Peru. There's some geographical barriers that don't make it easy for them to fly. But for the black-and-chestnut eagle, I'm sure there's plenty of connectivity and they can fly back and forth.
I think the only species that recognizes country borders are humans. So this is why we need to protect this area as an ecosystem and the functionality of the ecosystem without importance of which country it belongs to. So that's the idea, to connect these two countries, our legislation, our institutions, our concern on the ecosystem and the species as a whole, not only as my space.
Okay, great. Our next question is for Fabián. Is the average Ecuadorian or Peruvian aware of this corridor and the efforts that are underway?
Well, not the average. We have like 12 years working on the northern side of this corridor. We achieved the first corridor recognized by the Ecuadorian government, the Sangay Podocarpus. So this is part of the Andean Corridor. So we are using this experience to expand the conservation with this idea of connectivity to southern Ecuador and to northern Peru. So, of course, local people is getting aware every time more, but we need to do more efforts to connect communities, because institutions know, conservation institutions for sure know, but we need to go to every community to show how they are benefit from this kind of conservation efforts and how they will be affected if there's no effort in the future. So that's part of the process.
Okay, Cindy, the next question is for you. Does the federal or local government reimburse locals for loss of livestock that are killed by Pampas cats?
Yeah, I know that's like a conservation action that's been used in other countries, but unfortunately for Peru, that's not the case. And you could argue that, like chicken is not, like it's part of the livelihoods of these people, but then we'll have higher conflict with pumas, for example, that predate on species that are more valuable, and we don't reimburse, like the government does not reimburse these people, so I don't think are reimbursing either for the chickens, and that's why we have these activities that hopefully will reduce that and wouldn't need the money from the government, which sometimes is really scarce.
Thanks, Cindy. Okay, Sebastián, this next question is for you. Is there a program to pay chicken farmers for any chickens taken by eagles? That's another kind of similar question, but.
No, we don't have any program of that sort, and we don't actually recommend that. I know it has been useful and has worked with several species in North America and Europe, but the realities here make it so extremely difficult for a program like that to work. What we try to do is get people, help them improve the areas where they keep the chickens, getting them different ideas mostly that have worked. We are starting to develop a more, like I talked before, to have a manual, like to just go and with that manual be able to help people a lot better. But we don't recommend paying for a chicken lost. It's very difficult to justify, this chicken was taken by the eagle. And when people are living within the forests themselves, it's extremely difficult to to get, for example, someone from the government to go and verify that and say, okay, we can give you some funds for the chicken. So it's not recommended because of the reality here in the ground.
I would like to add something else in that point. Yeah, it's very important to analyze the context of all of these approaches. There are a lot of things to do to improve in terms of management of the cattle and the farm animals in general words. So we need to work really hard in that way, and then evaluate that strategy, and then think about options of like this. I really consider that the last option, because it's really difficult to sustain this strategy for a long time, and people locally, once you start to pay, you cannot stop, because it will be like a boomerang in terms of, okay, you are not paying anymore. It could be really bad for the wild animals. So we need to always, when we want to transfer any strategy from other countries to tropics, we need to look a lot, to think a lot of the context before to start.
Thanks, everybody. Those are great answers. And I think, yeah, help center all of us in thinking about how this would be, strategies that have worked in the US or in Europe aren't always going to work, in other areas, and especially in the tropical Andes. Fabián, this next question's for you. How has climate change affected the Andean Corridor?
Well, we don't have much information, but we are sure it's affecting us, and it will get worse. The Andean Corridor, as I mentioned, the Andes here are lower, so there's not much space to go up. I mean, in terms of the ecosystem, once the planet is warmer, the Amazonian ecosystems will go up. That's the issue. So the top ecosystems like the Páramo, that's the area where the water is stored and delivered to the watersheds, will disappear probably, will be very affected. And the Páramo is a huge carbon storage. So once it's this kind of soil that is containing a lot of organic material, once it's dry, all this CO2 will escape. So this will be very bad in terms of the water supply, the biodiversity, and the carbon leakage.
Thanks, Fabián. Okay, Cindy, the next question's for you. Will the corridor minimize the risks of new roads being built that causes vehicle strikes of the Pampas cats?
Yeah, for sure. And roads are a big problem, not only for Pampas cats, but for many other species. And like protecting areas and safeguarding these safe spaces, then like not allowing roads to be built, which I know are important, but like keeping some areas that are still connected, not crossed by roads, are for sure will help survivals, not Pampas cat, but also many other species.
Fantastic. Rodrigo, the next question's for you. Do we know the level of connectivity, both physical and gene flow, for Andean bears from cloud forest to the Páramo and vice versa?
No, we have not. What I say before is that we know for sure that in the past, historically, the population were connected. What the measurements of genetics say is that the population was a kind of increase in the numbers, but then reduce. And it seemed like there are a kind of a structure in the population. It means that they have some kind of isolation, northern and southern Ecuador, but they can consider in general words like for a whole population, a pandemic population in general words. So, but it's a good question. My hypothesis is that this species, because of the high level of diversity that they have available, diversity of food they have in the Paramos, especially in southern Paramos and northern Peruvian Paramos. I believe, we have not measured yet, they don't develop a really long distance migrations. They specialize are really deep in the plants that are available in the highlands and also in the lowlands. Of course, you have migrants between them, these areas, these ecosystems at a landscape scale, but I think also the density could be higher than in other places. We have some spots where we have measured the population, the number of individuals in some places, and there are many more than expected in terms of a surface. But we have to work deeper to really know if it is a pattern in southern Ecuador or other regions in the country. So yeah, we don't have evidence of long distance between the high and the lowlands. But what is important in the corridor is that if you consider the whole region of northern Andes, it means from Venezuela to northern Peru, this is the biggest portion of territory with connected habitat between the Paramos to the jungle. It's more than 5 million hectares of habitat. And it's happened because we have not a road in Ecuador, for example. We have not a road in the Amazon area that continue to the border, the Amazonic road who cross the country from north to south is just stop in Zamora Chinchipe. And we hope, we expect that it's the same and it continue the same, because in Podocarpus you can follow the connectivity from the Paramo to the jungle in Peru. So we have to work hard to avoid any kind of human or anthropic construction in terms of roads or big activities like mining, for example, in those areas.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Yeah, definitely. Thank you for highlighting some of the threats as well. Fabián, this next question is for you. And after this question, there will be 3 more questions, and then we will conclude the webinar. Fabián, are there other species besides the warbler that migrate from South to North America?
Well, there are many migrant species that we found in the corridor, at least 25. We have tanagers, we have swallows, we have kites, sandpipers, cuckoos, peewees, flycatchers, warblers, thrushes, and other kind of species. So many of them use the corridor and other areas around, but especially the warblers use the exact habitat that is in the corridor. I mean, in the cloud forests of both sides of the Andes Cordillera. There's no other ecosystem they can use. So especially it's important for warblers, the conservation of this kind of connectivity. And these species are also important for us because when they come, they are insectivorous. So they go to the crops, coffee, cacao, and other kind of crops, and helps to control the worms and that kind of thing. So we also receive species from southern South America, and means from Argentina, Chile, etc., going to the north. And this is a kind of a bridge between North and South America for migratory species.
Thanks, Fabián. Okay, great. This next question is for all of the panelists. How do you feel progress is going towards global goals like the Aichi targets for land conservation and connectivity? What do you think could be improved? If that was an acronym and I pronounced it as a Spanish word, I apologize.
Well, I can say that Aichi targets wants to have at least 17% of the land of Earth protected in each country. I mean, that's the commitment of each country. Some of them achieve that, some of them, most of them doesn't. In Ecuador, we had a chance to go to 22% of protected land of Ecuador. Peru doesn't achieve this goal, but probably this is because connectivity is not part of the equation now. I mean, the countries want to create reserves. That's good, but we also need to create this kind of connectivity areas that are formed by reserves, but are also formed by landscapes managed in terms of sustainability in production and conservation. So if we add our corridor and the local reserves that we have created in this area, we will go very, very fast in up. I mean, in terms in the percentage of land protected in Ecuador and Peru. But this is still a challenge to have this proposal in the reports. I mean, in international reports, because they only count reserves that are in the national system, but they don't count reserves that are local. Communities and municipalities are conserving even better than the national systems in some areas, because they are implementing projects, budgets. They are because the water for them comes from these forests, and they depend on the ecosystem services. So we want to make, especially in Ecuador, we want to make the Ministry of Environment to recognize these areas that are formed locally and include in the account of the national protected system. So this will be improved in terms of including connectivity and recognizing local efforts.
Thanks, Fabián. Does anybody have anything to add? Okay. If not, I'll move on to the last question. Final question for everybody. So how is the data from the 3 species that we've talked about helping to conserve the ecosystems of the corridor? And what would you say are the key actions to achieve a successful management of a connectivity corridor?
I could start, and then whoever wants to follow, it's fine. So I think in terms of research, of species-specific research, we're guiding and we're showing, like with our research, which are the key areas that need to be protected or that will be more meaningful to, like influence connectivity. What Fabián was saying about, like just focusing on protecting without thinking of the connection, that's like a literally change that we need to be making. So I think that's something that we need to improve. And then what was the second part of the question? I forgot it, but I had something to say about it.
Here, let me. What are the key actions to achieve successful management of a connectivity corridor?
Yeah. Something else that I think it's lacking. It's like communication with local communities. As Fabián also mentioned, not everybody's aware that there's this corridor. Like this idea of a corridor. Like how much are we communicating? And these spaces that you guys are creating right now, it's allowing us to at least spread the word to whoever is available, right? But communicating in the ground to whoever is there locally, that's I think what will improve and make things happen faster.
On our side, well, we know that, pardon, Rodrigo, our species that we're working with is a top predator. So top predators are very important for the functioning of the whole ecosystem. And the more we know about them, the more we can conserve them and conserve that ecosystem itself. Since they are also able to adapt to being in a more deforested area, not all the way, but with small patches of forest. And these eagles are very important for the connectivity of those patches as well. And going over the human altered landscape as well. So the more we know about special species and umbrella species, the more information we have to help us conserve and understand the whole ecosystem. Now, the actions that we think have to be taken to manage the corridor, is talk with people, talk with everyone, make sure everyone knows about the corridor, like Cindy said as well, making them understand how it benefits them, particularly them, how having an eagle around to control other species and other species numbers will benefit them directly. That's one of the ways we've been able to get people to understand the importance of this conservation. And one of the important things that should be taken into account in the corridor as well is the management of invasive species, like Cindy as well said. Dogs or domestic cats cause a great threat to the environment, to the different species that are very important for this connectivity. Amongst the Andean condors here in Ecuador, one of the main threats for condors is the prevalence of a lot of feral dogs and domestic dogs that are not well kept and that are just free roaming. So it's very important also to integrate all these different factors, including good agricultural practices, into the management of the corridor for it to be effective.
Yeah, I just add, since conservation budget is not always, will not be never enough. We need information. We have been creating protected areas, but we don't know what's going on inside, in deep. Last year, at the end of 2021, we published the new red list of mammals of Ecuador. And all of this information is about surface of habitat available for them. We have not information about populations. We don't know how many bears we have in the Podocarpus National Park, Sangay National Park. And we don't know the health of these populations. So we need indicators, not only about biodiversity, but the traits, and indicators about our actions. That's not a new. Everywhere, when you make a management plan of a protected area, you can see there that you have to measure things. And we don't do that in Ecuador at all. And how we can handle management with no information? We only have the maps. How many landscape and how much forest was born? But what about the selective deforestation that we have already? We can see forests from the satellite images, but there is a lot of loss of structure on that forest. You have a lot of hunting inside of the forest, and you don't know what's going on with the animals there. So we need to think a lot of which kind of indicators we have to select, because we need to be really efficient selecting that indicators in all of the three lines: wildlife, biodiversity in general words, and in different scales: landscape, ecosystems, populations. So I think we have to push a lot in that direction, and we have to be creative because we have not too much money. So that's why we are trying to training in local and citizen science and local monitoring to improve the methods, to standardize the methods, to be available to create a good level, level of data, good enough to share it and to have a good picture of all of the scales that we can measure. So that's my perspective.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Thank you to everybody for a very comprehensive look at, how connectivity is important for all of these species specifically, but also all of the different, all of the different management tactics that have to go into preserving that connectivity corridor. Well, I really appreciate all of our panelists coming on tonight and staying even a little bit later. And thanks to all 35 of you who made it with us here to 5:18 p.m. So this is the contact information for all of our panelists. If you'd like to keep in touch with them, if you want to get in touch with Fabián, you can email us and we'll put you in touch with Fabián. But this is some contact information for the rest of the panelists. Thank you to all of them. And if you enjoyed what you heard tonight, please support all of this work by following Nature and Culture on social media, following our panelists on social media, signing up for the Nature and Culture newsletter, and donating to Nature and Culture and supporting the Andean Corridor that way as well. If you have questions about donating to Nature and Culture, please feel free to get in touch with me. You can contact us at that hello@natureandculture.org email address, and we can set up a time to chat about donating. But thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to everybody for staying on, and please keep in touch with us, and we'll keep you updated on the progress of the Andean Corridor. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for being here.